Before we start actually writing Python code, we need to make sure that our system is set up so that we can edit files and actually run that code. So I'm here in my Windows Server virtual machine. You can run Visual Studio Code on a Windows desktop. You can run it in Linux. Visual Studio Code is available pretty much everywhere today, but it works well in Windows, so that's where I'm going to unit. Python is also cross-platform. You can run Python on many different systems, but we're going to use Windows just because the graphical user interface for us is going to work well. So I'm going to scroll down. I'll let you read that on your own time. First thing we need to do is install the Python runtime. So on python.org, I'll open that up in a new window. We can download the Python runtime. It's important to follow these steps carefully because a couple of missed clicks and things just don't really work that well, and then you have to go through and do it again, sadly. So python.org, we can go to the downloads, and I'm running Windows, so I'm going to click Windows. And we just want the latest released. So I see Python releases for Windows, latest Python 3 release. If you're watching this video after I record it, there might be a new one. That's fine. Just download the latest release. And so we can see what's the news. Oh, that's good. I'm going to choose for that latest stable release, download the Windows installer. So that first link shows you what's updated in this version. Down here, the Windows installer 64-bit, that's what we want. We're running 64-bit Windows. We'll download this file, and as soon as it downloads, it went real quick. I'll go ahead and open it. Now, really important step right here. A checkbox. Many times when we install software, we can accept all the defaults, but I want to check this box, really critical. Add Python exe to path. That's going to let me open up PowerShell and just run the command Python, and I can get into the interactive interpreter, or I can run Python files from the command line. This will make your life easier. So once that box is checked, then let's go ahead and install now. If you went through this and you realize, oh, I forgot to check that box, just rerun the installer and check that box. That's the easiest way to resolve that issue. This should go pretty quick. Yeah, got that box checked. Oh, that's good. So we just have to wait a minute. We don't want to start PowerShell yet because this installation is going to add Python to the path. And when you start PowerShell, PowerShell will load your most recent path variable. That's the path is where your computer looks for programs. Oh, this is good. Fine. I'm going to go and click close. So if we had launched PowerShell previously, this next step wouldn't work. All you would have to do is close PowerShell, start it again. But let's check. I'm going to start find PowerShell. Windows PowerShell. And I can do a quick test and just run Python. And it worked. I see the interpreter here in Python, which is nice. It says I'm running Python version 3.13 here. I see these 3 angle brackets here. I can write some code here. I can start programming in Python. So we can do some tests here. Print parentheses hi, and it prints out hi. We can even do some math. If you don't like the Windows calculator, we can write code. Spacing, we can include spaces or not. We're just testing to see if things work. To raise something to a power, an exponent, we can use 2 **3. Here's an interesting one. What's going to happen when I run quotes A times 5? What? Doing math on text? Decide what you think is going to happen. I'll hit enter. In Python, this just repeats that character 5 times. So that's just a little bit of fun just to make sure Python is working, and it does seem to be working just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and exit Or you could use quit or Control Z. That will get you out. And I'm done with PowerShell now. So I can close PowerShell or I can exit PowerShell. That'll close that window. So that's good. Now we can close our Python download window. We'll go to the Visual Studio Code download page. So I'll open that link in a new window. Visual Studio Code is a great editor for a lot of different programming languages or even text files, tons of different files. It's a very versatile editor and it's free, which is nice. So I'm going to download it. I do not care about that, Microsoft. So it says Windows 10 and Windows 11 here. It's going to work on Windows Server. That'll be just fine. I'm going to use the system installer. So next to system installer, there's that x64, that's 64-bit. That's good. This will install it for every user account on this computer. It'll work just fine. So I'm going to open up that installation. And I will accept the license agreement. I will not sue Microsoft for using Visual Studio Code. It's going to install my C program files, which is fine. Just click next. Sure. Create a start menu folder for me. Go ahead and click next. And all these are fine. I will actually check those two boxes. These aren't necessary, but add open with code actions to Windows Explorer file context menu. So if I right click on a folder, I could say open with code. That's good. I'll click next. All right, I'm going to finish the install here, and I'm just going to pause the video while this goes through because nothing exciting is going to happen. Okay, so the installation finished. Do I want to launch Visual Studio Code? Yep, sounds good to me. I'll just click finish and launch Visual Studio Code. I can close that extra web browser over here. Now, here we are. Very important decision you have to make at this point. Absolutely critical. Do you want to be a responsible human being and use dark mode? Or do you want to burn your eyeballs with light mode? So I'm going to go with dark, modern. Looks good. You know, that's fine. We don't actually have to change any of this other stuff. I'm just going to close this welcome tab. There will be a lot of tabs in Visual Studio Code, so I'm going to go ahead and just close that tab. Little bit about this interface. So here on the left, you've got your Explorer. That's where you can see files. I haven't opened anything yet, so there's no files or folders open. If you need to search your project, you can use that search button. Here, the source control, we're not going to use it, but if you want to track granular changes to your program files, that's where you would use source control. You can run and debug programs and find extensions. Extensions are really useful for adding functionality to Visual Studio Code. So let's go to the extension tab because we want to use Python. So let's go to extensions, and I will search the marketplace for Python. And the first one, Python language support. Wonderful. We want that. We want Python language support. Notice this has been downloaded 140 million times at the time of this recording. It's published by Microsoft, so this is good. Generally speaking, when you install extensions, you want to make sure that they're from a legitimate publisher. Microsoft is legitimate. So I'm going to install that and just wait. We're going to have these three extensions installed by the time we're done with this. So notice when I installed Python, it automatically started installing the debugger, which is good. And while we're here, I'll search for Pylance. A performant, feature-rich language server for Python in Visual Studio Code. Notice it says disable uninstall. It's because I've got it installed. So Microsoft took care of all that stuff for us. If I clear out this search right here, I can see what's installed. And I'll drag this tiny thing down. I've got just installing Python gave me Pylance and the Python debugger. So that's fantastic. So I'm just going to close this extension tab. And I'm going to close this Getting Started with Python Development tab. We're going to do those tasks, but we'll do it slightly differently, not using this wizard. I can close the extensions just by clicking that extensions icon. It'll collapse it. So now I'm back in the editor just with nothing going on. So we want to create a folder for our Python code. And I'll just be lazy or efficient, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to put this on my desktop. So I'll right click, new folder. Doesn't really matter. Excuse me. Doesn't matter what you name it. I'll call it Python. Call it my Python. You could call it 116. Call it whatever you want. Python doesn't care what you call it. Now in Visual Studio Code, we want to open that Python folder. So I'll just go to File, Open Folder. And I saved it on my desktop. So I'm just going to double click Python. So you can see my path here. It's just on my desktop in the Python folder. And then you can click Select Folder. Not a whole lot's going to change. I do want to trust the authors of the files in the parent folder desktop. So yes, I trust the authors. Microsoft's trying to make sure you're not running code accidentally that might cause damage to your machine. I trust the authors. So now, when we open that folder, Microsoft automatically opened this Explorer tab here. So you can click that, expand it, collapse it. If you ever need to go find your files, you can look in that File Explorer. There's a few ways that we can make a new file. In this Explorer, in my Python folder, I can click this plus file to create a new file, or I could create a new folder, or just refresh what already exists there. If I created a file outside of Visual Studio Code, or you can right click in this area and say new file, whichever way floats your boat. I'll use the icon. I'll create a new file and I'll call it first.py, our first Python file. And when we create that file, notice that it opens up in a tab over here. We've got another welcome tab. I'm going to close that welcome tab again. They're so inviting. They're so hospitable. So Visual Studio Code knows this is a Python file because I gave it the .py extension. So it's going to help me out there. And I just want to make sure I'm staying in sync with my own instructions. So let's create our first Python program. And all we're going to do is print it is working, period. As I type, Microsoft's giving me some help documentation to tell me like how to use this print function in Python. We can ignore that for now. Our program is good, but how do we run our program? Well, let me expand this a little bit so I can see the run menu. I could find it under that little hamburger menu there, but if I expand it, I can go to run and I'll start debugging. I want to use the Python debugger. And I'll run it as a Python file. So you'll see the terminal, our program will be running, and our program ran. So that big complicated command, Visual Studio Code, gave us all the right syntax to make that Python program run. And now we can see that indeed it is working. So it printed out the text, it is working. So let's make sure I followed all my instructions correctly. Yes. All right, so this is what we'll do. If we need to edit Python code, we will come into Visual Studio Code. We will edit these files. We'll add our Python code, and then we can run them using the Run menu. So hopefully you're comfortable with that. So if we're starting over, we close Visual Studio Code, our program is saved, everything's good to go. In the instructions, if we need to open up an interactive interpreter, we will go to the Start menu, into PowerShell, and we can just run Python. And then here we can print it is working. We'll use the interpreter just to run little code snippets, just to kind of explore. But once I exit from this interactive interpreter, everything I wrote is just gone. Nothing gets saved here. So we use this kind of for scratch work for learning. If I want to create a file, I will want to start Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is nice in that it remembers the last folder you have open, so I don't need to open up that Python folder again. If you need to, you always can go to File, Open Folder, find that Python folder. So I'll create a new file here. I'll call this 2.py. And I'll print, in quotes, it is still working. Control S to save that file. Then I'll go to the Run menu, start debugging, Python debugger, and we're going to run this Python file. Just ignore all the other stuff. And it should print out, it is still working down here in the terminal. So that's good. Python is installed, Visual Studio Code is installed now, and I've got the right extensions to start writing Python programs. So notice here, I've got the Run menu open. If I want to go back and view my files, of course, I would come back here to the Explorer icon. Then I can see all of my files because I might want to open up a new file, or if you've got your files already open in different tabs here, you can switch back and forth. Intuitive, maybe. Takes some getting used to, but Visual Studio Code is a really good editor. A lot of people love it. A lot of people find useful extensions for working with different programming languages, for building websites, for working with all sorts of different things. So it's a tool I use just about every day. So that's it. If you can do all these exercises right now, you're set up for success in the next exercises as we really dig into the Python programming language.